Evening, everyone. Firstly, I'd like to just say a massive thanks to all of you for attending this evening. Fingal County Council is absolutely thrilled to launch the 2025 iteration of the Local Enhancement Programme. Again, thanks you for taking time out of your busy schedule. We hope this evening that this webinar will just give you a really good overview of what the Local Enhancement Programme is. We'll give you a little bit of space to answer some questions. So we'll try our best to answer any questions you have. What I'm going to do first is really just give an overview of the programme, an overview of the timeline, give you a little background about it, tell you what's eligible, tell you what's not eligible, give you a couple of tips about your application. And then at the very end, we'll have time for a little bit of a Q&A. If you'd like to use the Q&A function, just to pop your questions in, and we'll try to answer them at the end. But I will kick off, so I can maybe give you some time back for your evening. But just to start, what is the LEP? So the Local Enhancement Programme, the LEP, provides funding to support community groups across Ireland. The LEP is funded by the Department of Rural and Community Development and is administered by the Local Community Development Committee. So that's the team here in Fingal. The funding will help communities, community groups and committees, allowing them to continue to provide services to people in the area and in the process strengthen the bond that tie communities together. So for the 2025 iteration, unlike the 2024 iteration, funding is available for both capital and current costs, so day-to-day running and operational costs. So what's available? Across the country, there is €7 million available for funding, and it's been allocated for community groups, inclusive of men's sheds and women's sheds. Fingal County Council has been allocated €268,827. So we have €230,423 for capital funding and €38,404 for current funding. So a slightly smaller pot for the current funding, but still substantial. So just to note, groups can apply for both, but if you're applying for both the capital funding and the current funding, there are two separate application forms. So we would really ask you to apply for the both of them. So who is eligible? This it's pretty clear. Any non-profit community or voluntary groups can apply, and this is inclusive of men and women sheds, and there's a particular push to have men and women sheds apply. Commercial organisations and individuals are not eligible to apply for funding, so it really only is community and voluntary groups. I'm just going to run through now what projects are eligible for funding. So I want to reiterate that this is the non-exhaustive list of projects that could receive capital funding under the programme. But to note that the lcdc@fingal.ie is the email which we'll put up at the end. If you have any worries or any queries about if the project you have in mind is eligible, if you just send us an email, and we'll hopefully be able to chat through it with you. So development and renovation of community centres, accessibility improvements, community amenities, development of youth clubs or facilities, development of sports recreation facilities, improvement to town parks and common areas and spaces, CCTV equipment, public realm improvements, streetscaping, development of play recreation spaces, improving energy efficiency of community facilities to reduce ongoing costs. The purchase of equipment is a big one we saw this year. The purchase of laptops, tablets, maintenance of premises, including painting and repairs, capital work to increase biodiversity or to reduce the carbon footprint of a facility, cleaning equipment. Then these are the ones that mainly apply to the capital funding. So these are energy costs, electricity costs, refuse charges, heating charges. Then we also have operating costs, existing rental and lease costs, insurance bills, website maintenance, audit and accountancy fees. A really important thing to note is that to ensure appropriate monitoring and governance, the department is stating that only operating and running costs related to this period are eligible. So the 1st of June 2024 to the 30th of May 2025. So in a little bit, I'll run through tips for the application, and I'll bring this up again with the current application, because we're going to speak through about what you can upload as supporting documentation to ensure that you can get the correct funding for this period. Just before I go into that, I'd like to just note what isn't eligible. So the following expenses are not eligible for funding. This is a shorter list, but it's probably clearer than what is eligible for funding. So the first is private or commercial operations, costs which are being paid by another funder or department. So if you have another funder or department that's already paying for these costs, they won't be eligible. The purchase of lands or buildings. This is a particularly small fund, so the purchase of lands or building wouldn't be applicable, but they're not eligible for funding. Project management fees, feasibility studies, legal fees, employment costs, and projects which are not within keeping of the ethos of the programme. So just to note that the programme is here to help communities, community groups and committees, and allowing them to continue to provide valuable services to people in their area, and in the process strengthen the bonds that these communities tie together. So just to note, anything that's not keeping within that ethos won't be eligible. Are there any requirements for you when you apply? So there are tax requirements if you are registered for VAT. So the applicant group does not have to be registered for tax purposes. However, any applicant group or organisation that is registered for tax purposes must be tax compliant and in line with the revised tax clearance procedures, which came into effect in January 2016. The tax clearance access number and tax reference number must be submitted for verification processes. So within the application form, there's a small field where you can input your tax clearance access number and your tax reference number if it's applicable. So what else is required? Statutory consents. So applicants must ensure that all necessary statutory permissions or consents have been obtained before any works commence. So this includes but is not confined to planning permission, which is one of the key ones. So additionally, written evidence of valid insurance policy may be requested by the LCDC where relevant during the applications review process. So just to note, while it's not, you don't need to upload it with your application form, it may be asked for if it's relevant. So match funding, this is not a requirement under this programme. You do not need to be match funded for this programme. So I'd like to just run through some small tips for the application form, particularly the capital funding one firstly. So the application form itself will be hosted on submit.com, which one of my colleagues will paste the two links for capital and current into the chat. So it's an online form. There are no paper forms. And it's a really straightforward couple of questions that'll only take you about 10 or 15 minutes to fill out. But these are a couple of tips that we propose for the capital funding. So in the application form, we would ask you to be as specific as possible as you can when you're asking for purchase of equipment. So something like 100 footballs, a power washer, 30 trowels, sewing machine, 12 plastic storage containers, and repairs for lighting. This is specific. If you just put in sports gear, gardening tools, sewing equipment, we would take that as not specific. And additionally, to support these asks, you must submit 3 quotes from 3 independent suppliers, and screenshots are accepted. So I'll show you an example of that on the next slide. Just to note, for the capital funding, €10,000 is the maximum grant available. There's no minimum, but 10,000 is the max. And just to show you, apologies for a bit of a blurry screenshot, but this is an example of someone who would be asking for capital funding for equipment for printers. These are 3 printers all within the same price range, 3 different stores, 3 independent suppliers. So you will get the opportunity to upload quotes as part of your application. So we ask that you upload 3 quotes for 3 independent suppliers. We did get a query today about, do you need to upload 3 quotes for each thing that you're asking for? And the answer is yes. So if you're looking for a printer and a computer, you would need 3 quotes for the printer and 3 quotes for the computer. And this is just to ensure compliance overall. So for the current funding, it's a little bit more straightforward. So as noted, to ensure appropriate monitoring and governance, the department is stating that only operating and running costs related to this period are eligible the 1st of June to the 30th of May 2025, 1st of June 2024 to the 30th of May 2025. So what we're asking in your application this time for the current funding is that you please submit a previous bill or invoice as supporting documentation of how much you're applying for. So for example, if you received a bill in May 2024 for €800 and you were looking for €800 again for the 1st of June, we would ask you to submit that old bill as supporting documentation of how much you're applying for and how much you've already previously paid. So please note as well that you can apply for partial funding of a larger bill. And I'd just like to note that 3,500 is the maximum grant available for the current funding. So 10,000 is the maximum grant for the capital funding, but 3,500 is the maximum grant for the current funding. And that can be partial if you had a larger bill. And again, there's no minimum. Again, apologies for the blurry screenshot, but just to note, this is an example of 2 ways you could claim for this. So this is a bill, a fake bill for flow gas, and the total on this one is 235.88. So in this bill on the right, you could apply for 235.88, or you could apply for the partial cost of €180. But we would ask you again to upload supporting documentation of previous bills, just so we know what you've paid in the past and what you're claiming for, and as supporting documentation. So how is the drawdown of funding going to work? So firstly, we're hoping that we'll get approval for funding from the DRCD in Q2 of 2025. So we're looking at late March, early April, based on the timelines they've given us. Once we've gotten notification of who's been approved, we'll let you know via email if your application has been successful and if you've been approved for funding. What we ask is when you receive that email that you reply with an acceptance of funding. So when we send out the email to let you know you've been approved, we ask that you come back and accept that funding. To note, if no acceptance is received from you within the time frame that we give in the email, your funds will be reallocated to another group. If you haven't received a payment from Fingal County Council before, we'll also issue you with a physical setup form, and this will be required to set you up and get you paid. And the team in the LCDC and Fingal County Council will provide this. So when you're drawing down the funding, for capital funding, you will receive the funding in advance and be required to submit a receipt and a photo of the item by the deadline we will issue. Invoices will not be accepted as proof of purchase. So when you're doing your application, you'll provide 3 quotes. And when you provide those 3 quotes, that is what you will be given approval for. In the end, then we'll ask you to submit a receipt and a photo of the item to prove that you have purchased it, and as well that it's in your workplace. The photo cannot be a photo of the item in the shop, and it cannot be a screenshot from Amazon. It has to be purchased and in your premises, and just invoices will not be accepted. On the other hand, then for the current funding, once you have received approval of the funding, we will ask you to submit your bill in advance of payment. So once you're approved, we ask you to submit the bill you're looking to claim for and proof that you have already paid it. So we'll take a bank screenshot as proof that you have paid the bill. Once we have received that, we'll issue your capital funding. So just to reiterate, with the capital funding, you will receive the funding in advance and be required to submit a receipt and a photo. With the current funding, you must pay the bill first, and then you will receive the current funding afterwards. And funding will only be issued after we've received your bill and your payment of proof. So these are some key dates. I just want to note that once we go past March, the dates are slightly looser, just because we haven't been given those timelines from the department yet. But to note that the 13th of January at 5 p.m. applications will close. The 27th of January, we'll have the LCDC committee, they will evaluate it. And the 28th of March is our deadline to return it to the DRCD. So we hope then that late April and early May, approval for projects will be given. Then again, late April and early May, we'll try to get that approval notification out to you as soon as possible. Then it splits into the two streams. For those who have claimed for capital and who have applied for capital and been approved, in June, we'll send the funds to your bank account. July to September, we hope you'll spend the funds, and we've put that out to September for any of you that are on a summer break. We hope you will spend the funds then. And then in early October, the receipts and the photos will be returned. For those who are doing the current funding, we ask that you, once we issue you with your approval notification, we ask that you return your bills and invoices to us with proof of purchase. And then in June and July, we hope to have the funds sent out to your bank account. So we'll all wrapped up by June, July, August at the latest. Just again, to kind of end things there, the deadline is the 13th of January 2025, 5 p.m. via submit.com, which my colleague will paste into the chat, and the deadline will be strictly adhered to. But what I'm going to do now is run through some of the questions that have been pasted in, just to answer any questions that people may have. How does one submit evidence for future energy costs? So given the timeline, what we will do is we will take your previous bill as proof of what kind of money you're applying for, and then once you've made the payment um to the bill within that time frame, we'll then pay you out for that bill. Um, so that's how it would work for the things that are happening later on in the year. Is it okay to apply for more than one activity, or would these be two separate grant applications? So for those who are applying for more than one activity, we would ask that you do two separate grant applications. Within submit.com, there is a feature to copy your application, so a lot of your details will be passed over, but it would be two separate grant applications. And this is the same for the current and capital. If you're applying for two capital, it's two separate forms. Can we apply for funds to cover training materials? Yes, training materials would be eligible, yeah. Can oil or gas energy costs be submitted for funding in addition to electricity costs? Yes, they can. Yep. Just as long as you submit a bill with proof of how much it's cost you in the past. Yes, oil and gas energy can be submitted for funding. Just again as well to note that lcdc at fingal.ie, if you have any queries, that is the email to send, and we'd be more than happy to answer any eligibility questions you may have. Printers covered? Yes, printers are covered. Does the capital fund cover edging for flower beds? Yes, yeah, it would. For current funding, the money would all cover retrospective costs, rent. Usually I thought grants didn't cover retrospective costs. So the guidance that has been given to us by the department is that time frame, the 1st of June to the 30th of May, is the timeline that the costs are allowed to be claimed for. With the way our evaluation, the way we sent things back, you may have to pay some of those bills in advance, and that would be how you would claim for a retrospective costs. Part of my planning permission, which is granted as a wall, can I apply for this? You could apply to have it built, yes, as long as your planning is in place, and you will be asked to submit your planning permission number when you apply. Under current funding, we can apply for existing rental cost, but if the rental cost was likely to change in 2025, or if we could like to rent the use of a space for 2 times in a week compared to once a week, can that be accommodated? So essentially, when we ask you to submit the bills for previous payments you've made, that's only as supporting supporting documentation. There's be a small part in the application form where you can update and you can provide further information. If you'd like to apply for more, with noting that or less, we'll be able to look into it, and the evaluation committee will have a look at it. But we would grant you the amount or slightly less than you've applied for. We wouldn't be able to grant more. For those asking, our facilitator fees considered employment, we may have to just check with the department and come back to you about that. If you just if you'd like to send an email to lcdc@fingal.ie, we'll be able to come back to you. For the mural project, getting quotes from 3 artists, can they be text or do they have to be invoices of some kind? It would be advisable that you would get 3 paper quotes, 3 PDF quotes, but if you have 3 clear quotes from suppliers from text, that would be acceptable as well. Is the capital grant likely to be an annual event? So we've had a couple of iterations of a scheme in the past. This is the 2nd year of the Local Enhancement Programme. Prior to that, there was the Community Support Fund and the Community Enhancement Programme. So in previous year, this has been an annual thing, albeit under slightly different names and slightly different rules. So I can't say for certain, but it's likely to be an annual event. If employment costs are not eligible, can any other project-related form of paid work be eligible, such as graphic design fees? So employment costs are not eligible, as you've mentioned. If you were to, under the capital project, if you were paying a designer to paint or to to carry out works within the building, that would be okay, but paying employees of the community or paying volunteers of the community group for graphic design is not eligible. Alarms and Wi-Fi to provide security should be eligible under the current funding stream. Can you reiterate how do you copy the application? So on submit.com, once you've made the application, you'll be able to click apply again and use a previous application, and it'll give you the option to take one out from your previous applications and use that to apply again with making some slight changes. Is a Mailchimp subscription eligible under current? It should fall under the website maintenance aspect, but again, if you'd like to drop an email to lcdc@fingal.ie, we'll be able to answer your question. In terms of promotional material, like physical aspects, things you can buy would be available under the capital funding stream. Yes, defibrillator will be eligible under the scheme, under the capital scheme. Projector, screen, yeah, all okay under capital. So just to reiterate for those projects which are eligible for funding under the capital are development and renovation of your community centres, accessibility improvements, community amenities, development of youth clubs and facilities, development of sports and recreation facilities, improvements to town parks and common areas and spaces, CCTV equipment, public realm improvements, streetscaping, development of play and recreation spaces, improving energy efficiency of community facilities to reduce ongoing costs, purchase of equipment, laptops, tablets, maintenance of premises including paintings and repairs, capital works to increase biodiversity or reduce the carbon footprint, cleaning equipment, and then under current it's energy costs, electricity costs, refuse charges, heating charges, operating costs, rental, lease costs, insurance bills, website maintenance, audit and accountancy. And just to note, these are all available on the LEP landing page on Fingal's website, and the guidelines list everything that's eligible. Now it is a non-exhaustive list, so if you're unsure about any of the things, I see a lot of people are asking eligibility questions in the chat. If you just send us on an email, lcdc@fingal.ie, we'll be able to answer. But as well, those guidelines will be hosted on the website. If you get 3 quotes, you have to go with the cheapest supplier. We would ask you to go with the best value for money. Equipment and materials for children's group, that is considered capital. So capital is more so the physical, the paint, tablets, tables, sewing machines. These are examples we've had in the past, whereas current is more so the day-to-day operational, the running costs. Do partial funded projects get a higher priority at selection analysis? No. So the LCDC will, the evaluation committee rather, will prioritise those which align closely with our local economic and community plan, which is linked on the landing page as well. And as well, it is advised that the LCDC ring fence 30% of their grants for smaller amounts of funding, so €1,000 and less. But no, partial funded projects don't get a higher priority. Defibrillator costs, yes, defibrillators would be eligible under the capital scheme. Are big community events eligible for this funding? Yes, as long as they're organised by community groups and not commercial operations or individuals, yes, they will be eligible. So again, just to note, just for the first aid kits, apologies, yes, first aid kits, they'd be eligible under the capital funding scheme, yeah. Anything which is considered a piece of equipment that is supportive and enhances the local, your community group, would be eligible under capital funding. Again, just to stress, like if you do have something you are unsure of, you're unsure if it's eligible, please send us an email at lcdc@fingal.ie. For meeting room, apologies, for meeting room costs for community meetings, yes, you could apply under the current funding stream. So I'm just going to pop up the slide with our email. Just I'd like to thank everyone for coming this evening. Again, I know a lot of you have come into the chat with eligibility questions, but if you'd like to email us at lcdc@fingal.ie, we'll be able to get back to you as soon as we can with an answer about if your cost is eligible. To note, just all our details, all the Local Enhancement Programme details are on Fingal County Council's website. If you just search Local Enhancement Programme 2025, and my colleague will paste it again into the chat, all the details will be there. So do successful applicants receive the exact amount they applied for, or can the amount awarded funding be smaller? Yes, the amount awarded can be smaller. It's just dependent on what's being applied for and the amount of people who've come in for funding. We'd ideally like to help the widest range of community groups, so it can be slightly smaller, and that's why we'll ask if you have match funding, but it's not a requirement. High-vis vests and litter picking equipment, yes, that would be available. Is the rental of Astros covered? I assume that's the renting of AstroTurf pitches. Yes, that will be covered under the current scheme. Okay, perfect. I think that is it for the evening. Again, I think I've said it 4 or 5 times, but if you have any queries, please email lcdc@fingal.ie and we'll be able to come back to you as soon as we can with an answer about whether your cost is eligible or not. Again, if anyone would like any guidance, that's the email to go for any guidance with your application. Just email us at lcdc@fingal.ie and we'll try our best to guide you through the application and lend a helping hand. But again, just on behalf of Fingal County Council and the LCDC team here, the LEP team, we'd just like to thank you again for taking time out of your evening and for joining us on this webinar this evening. And we wish you all the best with your applications and we look forward to seeing them come in. Thank you very much.